Good afternoon. Thank you for tuning in for Day 2 of the 2020 CHCI Leadership Conference. We are happy that you could join us for our plenary session on addressing economic disparity and building financial security. My name is Alejandra Castillo, and I serve as the CEO of YWCA USA, the oldest women's organization in the nation, serving 2.3 million women and girls around the country with a network of over 200 associations. For over 162 years, YWCA has worked to eliminate racism and empower women. During this pandemic, YWCA is standing at the front lines of the COVID-19 response, supporting families and communities of color who are disproportionately impacted by COVID-19, the devastating economic downturn, and the national call for racial justice. The Latino community is at the intersection of these three crises, and our community is experiencing the widening economic insecurity in so many different ways. I am especially grateful to be afforded the opportunity to participate in this session because I know that to address and resolve economic disparity is to address and resolve issues around healthcare, education, fair housing, and income inequality. Today, you will hear from industry leaders as they examine the root causes of economic disparity in the Latino community and potential solutions to build a path to financial security for Latinos across the United States of America. In addition, we will look openly and honestly at the systemic root causes that perpetuate the long-standing inequalities that continue to impede and oppress the Latino community from realizing their full potential. Finally, during the session, we will work to identify real and actionable next steps, and most importantly, explore the role that we must play individually and as a community to be true change makers able to achieve the equality we deserve and seek. Based on these discussions, we will continue to forge the path forward to ensure we remain committed and reach our goals towards economic prosperity. So I look forward to the work we will do today, and I'm excited at the collective action and movement building that we will embark on to create economic growth and sustainability. I cannot go 1 minute longer or say one more word without acknowledging that today's session would not be possible without the support of this Entergy Corporation, Federal Home Loan of San Francisco, Google, and AARP. On behalf of CHCI, I would like to send a special and sincerely heartfelt thank you to these wonderful organizations for their generous support. Before we begin, it is an absolute privilege to introduce both our panel hosts, Senator Robert Menendez of New Jersey, Patty Ridelbarger, and moderator Norena Limon. For most of his political life, Senator Robert Menendez has been chosen to represent the people in the great state of New Jersey. For years, he advocated for progress throughout the state and was elected to the U.S. Senate in 2006. He is the highest-ranking Latino in Congress and has earned a national reputation for his leadership and expertise in matters of foreign relations in the Senate, which pairs with his longtime reputation as a fighter who puts U.S. families' economic security ahead of powerful special interests. Senator Menendez recently led a group of Senate colleagues to introduce the COVID-19 Health Disparity Action Act, addressing the disproportionate impact COVID-19 has had on communities of color. The bill would require targeted testing, contact tracing, public awareness campaign, and outreach efforts, especially directed at racial and ethnic minority communities and other populations that have been made vulnerable to the COVID-19 pandemic. We will also hear from Patty Ridelbarger, Vice President of Corporate Social Responsibility for Entergy Corporation. Patty supports Entergy's long-time and growing commitment to sustaining its community and customers through grant programs, volunteerism, and advocacy. To help us moderate this important issue, we are delighted to have Norena Limon lead the discussions. Norena is the Senior Vice President of Public Policy and Industry Relations for the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals. Prior to joining NHAREP, Norena dedicated 6 years to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. She also worked as Deputy Communication Director for Spanish language media under the Obama-Biden campaign. Today at NHREP, she leads the organization's policy and advocacy efforts, as well as its Hispanic Wealth Project. To our viewers, I hope you enjoy this session. Please continue the conversation on social media by following hashtag CHCIHHM20. Without further ado, please welcome Senator Robert Menendez.
Saludos familia, qué bueno poder estar aquí virtualmente con ustedes dado la circunstancia en lo que todos y todas estamos viviendo. I'd like to thank and congratulate the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute for moving forward with their 2020 Leadership Conference despite the many challenges this year has put in front of us. I'd also like to thank the panel of experts for generously donating their time and knowledge to this important and timely discussion, especially within the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. We're certainly living in the most challenging time that any of us, young and old, have seen. For some of us, the COVID-19 pandemic has meant being away from family, friends, and colleagues, adjusting to balancing our personal lives with our work lives while trying to remain healthy, safe, and sane. For the hardest hit, the pandemic has meant deep loss, the loss of a loved one, the loss of a job and income security, the loss of a safe place to live in, and for some, the loss of their health. The United States is home to 1/4 of the world's COVID cases and deaths, which means no one across this nation has escaped the tragic reality caused by this pandemic. And unfortunately, this has been especially true for Latinos and Latinas. For the past decade before the coronavirus, we held the highest employment rates of any group, became homeowners faster than any group, and opened up small businesses at a greater rate than any other group. Sadly, COVID-19 and this White House's failure of leadership have taken their toll on many of our community's gains. Because we are disproportionately represented in essential work settings, such as healthcare facilities, farms, factories, grocery stores, and public transportation, we are more likely to come in contact with and die from this virus. And according to the Pew Center, nearly 60% of Hispanics said they live in households that have experienced job losses or pay cuts due to the coronavirus outbreak and are less likely to have emergency funds to cover 3 months' worth of expenses. Additionally, the latest data shows that 49% of Hispanic renters have slight or no confidence in their ability to pay next month's rent on time. Latinos and Latinas have made up more than 18% of the U.S. population today, and we're expected to become nearly 1 out of every 3 Americans by 2060. That means the economic health of this country is deeply intertwined with the economic success of Latinos and Latinas in this country. There's not a shred of doubt in my mind that our communities will bounce back from this crisis, as we have done time and time again. Hispanics are truly a resilient people, but how fast we do so will depend on how we unite as a people, defeat this pandemic, and pull ourselves out of this crisis. I look forward to watching today's discussion and continuing to work together on solutions to address economic disparities and to build greater financial security for all of our communities in the days and years to come.
Buenas tardes. Es un placer estar con ustedes. Welcome, everyone. My name is Patty Ridelbarger. I'm Vice President of Corporate Social Responsibility for Entergy Corporation. I'd like to kick off this discussion by thanking the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute for this opportunity, as well as Senator Menendez, our moderator, Norena Limon, and our panelists. This topic is near and dear to my heart. As a Latina and the daughter of immigrants, I have deep gratitude for the opportunities that have been afforded to my family, And I also have an abiding appreciation for our nation's heritage as a country that was founded and built by immigrants. My father is from Honduras and my mother is from Mexico. My parents came here with no material wealth, but they were rich in so many other ways. Their work ethic, their faith in God, love of family, and their belief in the American dream. That dream came true for my family, but I know that this is not the case for far too many Latino families. Eradication of poverty and helping families achieve economic self-sufficiency is a major focus for Entergy Corporation. This year marks the 20th anniversary of our Low-Income Customer Service Initiative, which was created by our former chairman and CEO, J. Wayne Leonard. As a company, we can only be as successful as the communities that we serve. Poverty is an economic drain on our communities, stealing resources that could be better used on education, healthcare, infrastructure, and more. This is why Entergy invests in programs that help low-income families, and in particular Black and brown families, achieve first-time home ownership, build wealth and savings, learn financial literacy, reduce their debt, and increase their credit scores. Our signature volunteer initiative, the EITC Super Tax Days, supports some 300 volunteer income tax assistance sites across Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas. Since 2009, we've helped more than 150,000 families file for and receive $258 million in earned income tax credits. We also advocate for policy initiatives that can help level the playing field for low-income families, such as high-quality early care and childhood education, expansion of state earned income tax credits, and curtailment of predatory lending. You'll hear more about these and other tools and programs proven to help families like mine make their American dream a reality. I will leave you with one of my favorite quotes, "Pies, para qué los quiero si tengo alas para volar." Let's get on with the business of giving our people wings to fly.
Good afternoon, buenas tardes. My name is Noerena Limon, and it's great to be here today at CHCI's first all-virtual leadership conference. I would like to thank CHCI for hosting this powerful event as we focus on addressing the economic disparities and financial security of our Latino community. Before we begin, I'd like to make a shameless plug for the CHCI program. As a proud alumni of both the internship and the fellowship program, CHCI is an organization that I credit for being instrumental in my career. And I want to thank all of you for being here today and for your support of the work CHCI does to create the next generation of leaders. Now, as someone who labors over data, who spends her days analyzing the economics of our country, one of the things that I keep scratching my head about is how little we as a nation have fully grasped the outsized role that the Latino demographic plays and will continue to play in securing the viability of the American economy. We cannot have a conversation about bridging the wealth gap, addressing economic disparities, and building financial security without conceptualizing what the implications of doing so has on the nation's overall economy. Quite frankly, I feel that we do not operate as a community as one who internalizes that power. So let's take a moment to set the stage with some numbers. Latinos are 18.5% of the population, the nation's second largest demographic. We're the fastest growing population and accounted for over 50% of the population growth over the past decade. And not only are Latinos the fastest growing demographic, but Latinos are incredibly young. At a median age of 29.8, Latinos are almost 14 years younger than the US white population. And as non-Hispanic white baby boomers exit our workforce, the nation becomes increasingly reliant, not only for Latinos to continue to fuel our workforce, but to account for an increasingly larger share of consumer demand. So I'm delighted to be joined today by four exceptional experts on this topic. Please help me welcome someone I have the utmost respect and admiration for, someone I consider a mentor, Representative Tony Cárdenas, who has represented California's 29th district since elected in 2013. And next, let's welcome Dwight Alexander from the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco. He is the Senior Vice President for Public Affairs. Also joining us is Cristina Martin Firvida from AARP, where she is the Vice President of Financial Security and Consumer Affairs. And finally, we are pleased to have Noel Pollo, who is the Executive Director of the National Association of Latino Community Asset Builders. I honestly cannot think of a better panel to talk about how to bridge the wealth gap than this esteemed group of individuals. So welcome, panel, and thanks for joining us. I'm going to jump right in with my first question. Congressman Cardenas, per some of the statistics I laid out earlier, we cannot deny that Latinos are the future of the U.S. economy. A conversation about the U.S. economy cannot and should not happen without Latinos being at the center of it, both in the analysis of the implications on Latinos, but also, quite frankly, at the table as the decision makers. But when it comes to the economy, we're often not. The economy is seen as something handled by others. So Congressman Cardenas, what do you think about that? Do you think that we as a Latino community internalize that power and our role in the economy when it comes to navigating economic policy?
Well, first of all, thank you, Lorena. Always good to see you, and thank you for proving to everybody that Latinas are amazing and they can take on tremendous responsibility. And usually if you want something done, get a Latina to do it, not a Latino. Anyway, thank you for having me, everybody. It's my honor to be here, and I apologize. I'm probably going to have to disappear from the screen as they called votes, so I'm trying to stretch it as long as I can. So your question has to do with Latinos, Hispanos in the United States of America and the economy. We are in excess of $2.3 trillion every 12 months per year that actually leave our wallets and actually go into the diaspora of the American economy. We are overrepresented in so many sectors of the economy, but that's a good thing. And another thing as well is we've seen right now during this pandemic, Latinos are on the front lines in ways that people never appreciated before, making sure that we can put food on our table, being involved as dreamers, as nurses and doctors, even though they're not welcomed by this current president, still putting their lives on the line to make sure that everybody in America can actually receive their. And another thing that I'd like to say is, yes, Latinos are a major critical part of the United States economy. And not only are we the future, Norena, we are the past and we are the present. We are here at 16 million strong, and we are oversubscribed when it comes to being in the workforce, especially with the toughest jobs, the jobs that many Americans don't want to do, and immigrants like Latinos are more than happy to do. So the bottom line is we are an integral force, even though the last part of your question was, do Latinos, or I think I understood you to say, Latinos don't internalize their importance. You're darn right. And with all due respect, I think that has to do with over 400 years of being treated as though we don't matter by conquistadores from hundreds of years ago to a government in the United States with a president who is saying that we're nothing but thieves and drug dealers. Those are the kinds of things that don't help with our now, but at the same time, even with all of that, we are well represented in our economy. We are givers, not takers. And the bottom line is this: we will come into our own. And the last thing I'm going to say on that is we have the Latino Museum that passed the House of Representatives unanimously. And we are going to be able to showcase the beauty, the awesomeness of the Latino presence from hundreds of years past to the present and into the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman, for your work on getting that passed. That's been a long time coming. Next question. I know that you have to go to votes, but I would be remiss if we talked about the economy and we didn't talk about small businesses. Now, Latinos have been starting businesses at faster rates than any other demographic. However, the pandemic has hit small businesses and Latino small businesses especially hard. The Paycheck Protection Program was a lifeline for many, but a new survey from the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative stated that only 1 in 6 Latino businesses had enough cash flow to survive the next 6 months. That's scary. What can you tell us about what we can expect from Congress in support of our Latino small businesses?
Well, what we did, and we were forced to do it ad hoc and very quickly, since this administration is not cooperating with Congress, is we had to evaluate how did businesses of color, specifically Black and brown businesses, do when it came to the federal loans that were put out there to help people get through this pandemic. And it turned out that upwards of 90+% of the Latino and Black businesses in America who applied for these federally backed loans were denied, disproportionately over their white counterparts. And that's just wrong. So what we did in the HEROES Act, we passed it on May 15th. We passed the HEROES Act to specifically earmark a certain amount of money for businesses of color and a certain amount of percentage of those future funds for the smallest of businesses with 10 employees or less. And many of those mom and pops, those Latino businesses are exactly that. They started in their homes. They're just fledgling businesses. And you're darn right, Norena, the statistics don't lie. They do not have the resources to last beyond the next few months. And another thing as well, this pandemic has exacerbated and exposed the disproportionate lack of healthcare and lack of financial support to the Latino community.
And can we expect another iteration of the Paycheck Protection Program before the election?
Well, we hope so. Like I said, the HEROES Act did a much better job, much more accurate job that we passed on May 15th. It passed out of the House of Representatives. It has not had a hearing, nor has it been brought to the floor of the United States Senate, which is run by Senator McConnell. And unfortunately, he's got a wait-and-see attitude. I don't understand what they're waiting to see. We have passed another amount of money to help these small businesses and to help people with their health care and to help local governments so they don't lay off firefighters and nurses and doctors, et cetera. So what can we expect? Hopefully we can expect some movement on the negotiation from Donald Trump and Senator McConnell, but we've done our work in this House. I came back to Washington just yesterday, again, to make sure that we pass another bill of support so we can prove to them that we are here to help the American people.
Thank you, Congressman. It's always great to see you.
Always good to see you. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you. So let's pivot a little bit and talk about wealth and wealth creation. Now, household wealth or net worth is calculated by the total value of assets minus our debts. According to the latest Federal Reserve Survey of Consumer Finances, Latinos have a median household wealth of around $20,600. Non-Hispanic white households have roughly 8 times the wealth as Latinos and 10 times the wealth as African Americans. Given that homeowners have 44 times the wealth that renters do, and given that homeownership is the #1 way Latinos build wealth in the U.S., let's talk about boosting homeownership rates among communities of color. Latinos have a 47.5 homeownership rate and have accounted for over 50% of the homeownership rate growth over the past decade. But yet Latinos still have under a 50% homeownership rate, meaning that the median Latino household is a renter. Dwight, how can Latinos get to a 50% homeownership rate?
Yeah, thanks, Norena. First, I want to say I'm really honored to be with CHCI, this leadership conference this afternoon. The Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco has been a proud supporter and sponsor of CHCI and the Congressional Hispanic Caucus for well over 15 years. And so I'm pleased to be here. I think, home ownership really is the linchpin in this country for wealth creation. So much so that the Federal Home Loan Bank, which I work for, was created in 1932 during the Depression to really make sure Americans could continue to own homes. And I think the first thing that we have to think about, just in terms of policy, broader policy, and making sure we get the home ownership rate up, is that home ownership has got to continue to be a high priority public policy. Because right now, there's a lot of talk that maybe people don't need to own homes. Maybe home ownership is not the way to go. But home ownership has been the foundation of this country. It locks people into their communities. Levels of home ownership also increase levels of education within communities and levels of wealth. And so I think that has got to continue to be the case, and we have to continue to push that and can't let the narrative be that we shouldn't own homes anymore. Because a big part of, housing policy supporting families, was done and created, but, racism and sort of deliberate pieces of those laws and things that were passed, both on the federal level and a local level, excluded, Black and brown people. And so now it's time to make sure Black and brown people are included in that picture and not just, skip the whole home ownership. Maybe you should rent, maybe you shouldn't own a home, because we know that is the beginning of, money to pay for educations and small businesses and and the like.
Thank
So let me stop there and not. I can go on further, but I think other people have lots to say, and we can get back into it.
Me too. It's my favorite subject. Well, when we talk about Latinos, we're talking about millennials. Noel, you and I have spoken about this before, and you mentioned that homeownership isn't the only housing asset building strategy, particularly for younger Latinos. Tell us more about what you meant by that.
Sure. Let me begin by saying thank you to CHCI. Lorena, it's always great to be in a conversation with you and appreciate being with such an esteemed group of colleagues here on this panel. I run an organization called NALCAB, the National Association for Latino Community Asset Builders, right? And so we think about the diversity of ways in which our community needs to build its wealth moving forward. And I agree entirely with what Dwight was saying. Home ownership is the linchpin of asset building. The data doesn't lie, right? What we want to avoid, though, I think, is creating the sense that home ownership is the only way, or neglecting thinking about the other asset building strategies that need to complement home ownership, both in a household and in our community overall. And so for the Latino community, clearly small business, you mentioned with the congressman, Latinos disproportionately start small businesses. And we've had a real challenge of breaking through that $1 million or $2 million revenue figure. And so one, small business growth is a terribly important way for Latinos in particular, and particularly young Latinos who aren't, maybe haven't built up that nest egg yet, right? So home ownership is a big step, and we need to think about what are the steps before we get there. We also have to remember that with regard to sort of, again, thinking beyond home ownership, is that where we live defines a great deal about how we build wealth and build assets. And so sometimes location is an incredible asset. And so while we're thinking towards the future for a family of home ownership, perhaps renting close to where they go to school, where they work, where their children are in childcare, right? That transportation cost sometimes can be crushing, particularly in the West Coast, right? Where generally we're spending more time in cars. Speaking to you from San Antonio, Texas, and we know a thing or two about staying in our cars, although we won't take anything away from LA. And so these are the kinds of issues that I think that we want to continue to talk to our community about home ownership, but not neglect the conversation about where we live and how that drives our transportation costs, small business. And I think we may be able to get to a conversation also about investments and savings, but we'll leave that to another moment in the conversation.
Thank you, Noel. And I also wanted to throw in into the mix the fact that COVID-19 has truly changed our concept of space, and working remotely has kind of shifted the pendulum on how we think about having to drive somewhere to work or where we live, and trading in the commodity of living close to work and trading in space. But yes, I wanted to underscore, what we think will be a quantum leap for household wealth the minute the Latinos reach that 50% homeownership rate, regardless, because of that outsized role that homeownership does play on household wealth. But Latinos have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. And the Census Household Pulse Survey showed that Latinos were twice as likely to be behind on their mortgages than their non-Hispanic white counterparts. And Latinos are among the least likely to know that forbearance options even exist. So what are the most important policy implications, Dwight, so that not only does the homeownership rate continue to grow, but that we can play defense and keep existing homeowners as homeowners?
Yeah, I think, sustainable homeownership is a very important thing. We saw during the foreclosure crisis in 2008 that, sort of lack of comprehensive policy, lack of knowledge, lack of information being disseminated about, how the forbearance process worked and how those things work. I think, one, the federal government and other, nonprofit agencies have to be really out there informing people, informing those homeowners. And I know NAREP does a lot of this, of programs and things that are out there to let people remain in their home. And I think, sort from the federal standpoint, there has to be, solid public policy that keeps, Latino homeowners in their homes. And the government has done this over time. Every time we've had a crisis, have stepped in to allow people to retain their homes because they know the retention of homeownership is sort of the leading part of bringing back community. And when you hit a recovery, that's going to help the recovery happen all the time. I think it's absolutely critical in the Latino community to make sure the information is out there and the resources are available.
We need a massive social media campaign where we all partner to get that information out there. Absolutely. Thank you, Dwight. So let's Noel, you talked about how we need to ensure that we're building assets across the board. So let's have a conversation about saving for retirement. Now, home ownership and retirement accounts alone, those two assets account for about 61% of the median family's wealth. According to the Federal Reserve's latest survey of consumer finances, only 29.7% of Latinos participate in retirement accounts. Latinos have the lowest participation rate out of any demographic. So tell us, Cristina, how prepared are Latinos for retirement, and what kind of implications does that have for the broader conversations about Latino economic mobility, and what can we do to boost those numbers?
Sure. Thank you, Norena, for that question. And as the other panelists have said, thank you to CHCI for the strong commitment to keeping this event going, even under these tough conditions. And we're very happy to join the panel and the celebration of public policy in the service of a strong Latino future that CHCI always presents. So to your question, one of the things that for us at AARP is an enduring challenge is that one of the strengths which you raised about the Latino community and our economic prospects is our engagement in entrepreneurship, in creating small business jobs for our community, and in small business ownership. But that in that is one of the seeds of our low participation in retirement plans. And that is because only half of all employers offer a workplace retirement savings plan to their employees. It has been proven again and again through research that the easiest, most consistent way to build retirement savings is through a workplace savings plan, where your retirement savings are automatically deducted from your paycheck, through your payroll, by your employer, but only half of employers offer it. And the half that do not offer it are disproportionately small business owners, and they're in communities of color. And so that is not because they don't want to. It is because offering a retirement plan is hard. It requires a level of administrative know-how and, to a lot of Noel's points, a real ability to feel confident that you can maintain that plan, that you can make a matching contribution. And these are not things necessarily that small businesses that we run can do, that risk is something that we can assume. So that's a tough reality. That one of the things that makes us so strong also is the seed of what prevents us from having a higher participation rate in retirement plans. Now, there are policy solutions for that, but they do require thought, and they do require commitment from state government, from the federal government as well. There are other reasons why we really struggle to participate at the same rates as our white counterparts. And, the reality is you cannot save what you do not have, and there is a real wage gap for our community, and it is especially pronounced for women. Latinas make 54 cents for every dollar that their male white counterparts make. And there is no amount of, social media campaigns or other education and outreach or financial literacy, or there's nothing that will make up for that missing money. You cannot save what you do not have. And then the last point that I want to make is We often see our own families as an asset, and there is a reality to that. But there's also, again, a commitment that we as Hispanics make to our families that is often seen in the caregiving that we provide. And here, again, I really want to underscore this is especially true about our women. And Latina women are providing an untold amount of unpaid caregiving, not just to children, but to older family members. And this has a real effect on their ability to save for retirement. We know from the research that we've done that Hispanic families have out-of-pocket costs of, on average, $9,000 a year for the care of an older family member, and that is almost 4 times as much as a percent of income as it is for our white counterparts. So when that much more of your income, of your household income, is going to support family members who need your care, and when the time that I take out of the labor force to care for a loved one means that I cannot earn additional income, that all has an impact on our participation in retirement plans, in the level of savings we can put together, and in the long term, in our financial security when we're older.
Christina, that's so, what you said really struck a chord at me when you said that, Latinos, we think of our children as our biggest assets. I think of my dad, and I think of, when you ask him, where are your investments? And he points to a wall with our diplomas and he says, that's my investment. But this concept of planning, of not planning for retirement and taking on an additional role of taking care of our elderly is a subject that's I think a hard conversation that we need to have as a community and as a family, right? So, Noel, entre familia, how can we have these tough conversations about finances? I'm going to share another anecdote. My mother does not believe in 401ks. She believes that we need to invest in something we can touch. The concept of the stock market, the concept of this elusive thing that you have no control over, such as stocks, such as 401ks, is something that Latinos are not comfortable with. Noel, talk about how we as a Latino community can address these perceptions and have these tough conversations with our loved ones.
Yeah, so I want to begin by just pointing back to some of the things that Cristina said, which I think were really fundamental. And you said they struck a chord for you. They struck a chord for me. The organization I run is a network organization. We work with with diverse anchor institutions and Latino communities all over the country, and we've published a Latino economic agenda, which is an agenda for targeted to the 21-22 Congress. And so many of the things that we heard from our network were in what Cristina was saying, reminding us of the role of Latinas in the economy and in these decisions that you're pointing to, Norena, about how the household uses money and brings in money, right? And so just terribly important, I think. But when we get to these questions, again, as I was saying earlier about sort of diversifying our investments, right? And one is that some of that hesitance, that concern, is not unfounded, right? So when our folks are worried about ¿qué pasará con el dinero si invertimos en I don't really know what that is, right? Who's got that money? Well, if we don't have a strong consumer financial protection process, there are reasons why particularly African American and Latinos have some doubt about whether their money is going to be invested well, whether they're going to see it back, right? And so that lack sometimes of enough strength, of protection, of confidence, as you were talking about, really leads to these unfortunate huge misses in our investment opportunities, right? But also part of this is also about education and learning, right? And so we need to do a great deal more, and generally the closer to the immigration experience our families are, the less familiar they are with the U.S. financial system and some of the investment structures that are unique to the U.S. system. And so I think we need to be particularly concerned about consistently and constantly communicating to our community about what does it look like to make a safe investment. One of the things I love to talk about is I love boring finance. If it's going to get you rich quick, ni lo pienses, right? If it's got a special stuff, everybody's gonna run to it. Stay seated, right? If it sounds boring and it makes a good solid return year over year, but not the some huge amount, now you should start listening, right? And so thinking about this idea of investment, particularly for our young folks, right? That this is not a get rich quick country, right? When our people get drawn into those sorts of things, bad things happen, right? And so I think there's a ton that we need to focus on education, right? And I think we need to focus on consumer protection and addressing some of those structures. End on, again, something that I think Christina artfully pointed to. Our policy and our systems around these, it's no accident, right, that our communities sometimes don't benefit as much from these opportunities. And so we need to be focused at the federal policy level, and one hopes that we have an opportunity in front of us in the coming year.
And Christina, what are some of these policy implications that we need to have as we think more broadly about the financial security of the entire family?
Sure. So for us at ARP, there's a lot of problems here that need attention and need policy support. For us at ARP, we've focused on looking at how we can expand workplace savings plans for small businesses, make it easy for small businesses to offer something to their employees if they want to. Over and over, we hear from small business owners they really would like to do that. It's an employee benefit, it helps retain the employees, but it's hard to do. And so we've worked with a lot of states in that legislation where state governments are essentially allowing small businesses to do a program where it's a pool of small businesses, the government takes over the administrative costs of running the program, and employees can participate at very low dollar amounts. Obviously, you give it to someone, save as much as you can, especially when you're young. But again, when you think about things like the wage gap, it may not be realistic. And these are some savings programs that are willing to take on very small dollar amounts. It's better to save a little than to not save at all. But for sure, there are a lot of retirement plans that if you try to open an IRA, the minimum balance is hard for a lot of our community members to meet. And so public policies that kind of overcome a lot of those barriers and put the administrative burden on the government. And then that's a shared responsibility among all taxpayers at very low cost to the community. But, really a high return for people who are going to be, maybe this is the first person in their family that's ever really participated in retirement plans. So, states like California have a program like this, and, primarily we've seen a lot of the West Coast states participating in this program, and that can be one pathway where we're both helping employers, we're helping the employees, and frankly, we're helping the state in that situation, because when I have a strong retirement, that means that I'm going to rely less on other means of public income support. There's nothing wrong with needing that, but from the perspective of the state government, that's a plus too. So that would be one thing that we would say can be a big help, and that would focus a lot of our energy.
Thank you, Christina. I also wanted to circle back into, as we talk about policies that are impacting some of these wealth creation initiatives. Dwight, what are some of you think are going to be some of the most monumental policies right now that will determine the homeownership rates or access to credit or access to lending for communities of color over the next few years?
Well, one of the biggest impediments for Latinos and African Americans to homeownership is down payment and actually saving for a down payment. As Christina talked and Noel talked about, how you get there and where you start. And one of a bill that was introduced by Senator Brown, uh, Senator Jones, and Senator Gardner, as well as a companion bill in the House, is the American Dream Down Payment Act, which would allow people to start saving for a down payment for a home from age 0, similar to the College 529 savings plan, so that we build in immediately a savings culture, so that when you get your birthday money of $100 or whatever, you can put it into that account, and that from age 1 to whenever, so that what I say is, look, we have this for college, and not everyone goes to college, but everyone needs a home and a place to live. I think support for that is vitally important. As Noel said, I think the consumer protections and strengthening consumer protections, vitally important. Also, one, just increasing banking services in the Latino community and the understanding of banking services, because by and large, most Black and brown people don't really understand how to use their financial institutions. We go to the ATM, we drop our checks off, we may withdraw whatever, but those institutions provide a whole lot more, and should be providing a whole lot more to communities of color than just a place to park your money. And so I think that sort of education, that becomes really important, along with consumer protection and building true savings strategies, not just for down payments, but also retirement savings strategy, whether it's a national retirement savings plan, similar to public thrift savings plans and things of that nature. I think really have to be thought about. And it's not popular to say, but they have to be race and race specific, because the policies that created the middle class in this country were race specific to whites, and were whites only, and did not include Black and brown people. And so I think some of these things are going to have to be fit into that vein, as well as broader policy for really supportive workers and supportive wages and quality jobs and better jobs. I think those types of things have to be on the agenda. They have to be on the national policy agenda.
Yeah, Dwight, and I think I want to circle back to the conversation that we had, that we opened this session with, on the outsized implications of the overall economy on addressing these disparities, and why it is so important, not only for Latinos, for communities of color, but for everyone in this country, that we address these issues. Well, with that, I'm getting a whole host of exciting questions from the audience, and I want to make sure that we shift gears a little bit and we answer some of these questions. So first, I have a question from Kim, which is, how can policymakers and leaders work together to ensure housing is accessible and affordable for working families? Who wants to take that one?
Well, maybe I'll jump in.
Yeah.
So, Norena, earlier in the conversation, you reminded us that COVID and the economic crisis that it precipitated has really changed the landscape, right? And so, in answering this question, right, I mean, we absolutely have to root ourselves in the current economic conditions. And one of the things we've seen coming out of COVID is that the recovery looks very, very different for two sides of the economy, right? If you're able to work from home with a white collar job and set up on your computer, you're actually recovering relatively well. And if you're not, if you're either an essential worker, right, or worse yet, in a situation where you're a service sector worker or similar who didn't get your job back, it goes back to the income question that Cristina brought up, right? And so I think when we talk about our policy moving forward, we are going to need to address income, right? And I think there's a variety of ways to do that. We still have an absolute need before next year, as soon as possible, to support the incomes of people who have lost their jobs. But then second, we're going to need to be able to not just support people's ability to pay, but also all of the damage that's been done to small owners of properties, right? One of the issues of an eviction moratorium is that people are not getting income, right? And so housing, doesn't get invested in. People lose their mortgages if they're small owners. And remember, many of our folks are in fact those small owners, right? The one place we've built our assets is by renting out a house or two, right? And then finally, just thinking about neighborhoods, right? We are going to need to reinvest in our neighborhoods and put in a glue to just to maintain the integrity of our neighborhoods, and not knee-jerk to some of the things that we saw begin to happen in the Great Recession, where, well, you know, the people can't afford them, they go foreclosure, and the highest bidder is going to get them, and there's just nothing to do about it. That's the market. These are the moments where we need to be able to step in and support our communities, because these issues are of no fault of their own, right? People who are losing houses or at risk of eviction. So just the emergency to it is what I'm trying to communicate immediately, and certainly, you know, whenever a new administration comes in, they're going to need to invest in these things over the course of a number of years, because these scars will be with us.
No, you brought up a terrific point. We did a survey a few months ago on that issue, the fact that Latinos, you know, may not want to invest in a 401k, but if they have extra money to invest, they'll invest in real estate. So there'll be mom and pop landlords. And we found that 1 in 4 have already had to borrow funds in order to cover operational costs. So this is a conversation, this is a broader conversation, that if these individuals lose these homes, these assets, you're going to have investors that are going to sweep these investments from communities of color, and those assets aren't going to come back. So it is imperative that we think about the conversation around renters and landlords is one and the same, and we need to do something about it. So thank you for reminding me of that. We have the next question from Eric Foster, which is, what independent studies have been conducted to document both the consumer and business procurement strength of the Latinx American community? So procurement, so this, I'm guessing this is contracts. Do any of you, and Noel, can you answer that?
Sure. So unfortunately, I didn't bring my bibliography with me, but there actually has been some very good work. I would point to a number of different places. One, the Stanford initiative, while there's not a focused study on procurement, they have touched on that in a number of their pieces. I think the work of the oversight committees for the SBA have looked at this, and so there's a number of congressional reports on this. Urban has done some work on this. And so I think there is, I'm not sure we need any more studies to tell us that there is a real need to open up our procurement processes to smaller businesses, to Latino and African American owned businesses. You know, Dwight said earlier that it's you know, maybe it's not popular to bring up the issue that we need to infuse race and ethnicity into our policymaking. Well, it's sure popular with me, because this is not about Black and Latinos getting their bit. This is about the macroeconomic strength of the United States of America and our ability to be globally competitive, our ability to grow our economy. You know, that's not going to happen if we are not investing in the communities that are the future of our economy.
Absolutely.
Oh, I think that's right. Let me just chime in there really quickly. Along that same vein and along producing that, a few years back, one of the things that the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco did was invest $100 million to create a quality jobs fund, which would allow expansions of businesses and other things if they were providing quality jobs, those jobs with a wage of at least $15 an hour or more, that included benefits and set people on a career path. And so I think more investments and things of that nature are going to be really important. And we're starting to see some results coming out of that. But we're also seeing that those businesses and things that have been supported, you know, are needing more support coming out of COVID because of the way, you know, the finance system and whether or not they're really tied into their financial institution and getting a PPP loan or those types of things, that kind of support has to be there for those businesses to continue to grow and for the communities to grow and to stay intact through this COVID crisis.
Yeah, and a lot of small businesses weren't able to get PPP loans simply because they didn't have a business account, and that is some of the work that we need to do to build that infrastructure going forward. So I'm going to move ahead to the next question, which is very related to what we were just talking about. This question is also from Eric Foster. Or actually, move on to give another person an opportunity. Araceli Panameño Hi, Araceli, asked, another loan will not increase long-term equity for Black and Latino business owners. We need a companion grant program as part of PPP. Is it possible? So I think we asked that kind of asked that of Congressman Cárdenas. Any thoughts on this?
I've been working on the PPP, from the first day, and there's no question that very small businesses extending more debt is not the solution right now. But I want to put it in the sort of context of older business owners, right? So there was a wonderful story of a tailor in San Antonio that ran in Texas Public Radio, and you get a sense of, here's someone who spent his entire life building his business, and now sort of in this short period of time, his financial legs have been taken out from under him, and it's just unfair. You listen to that situation and it's just unfair. And so I am particularly worried about older business owners, that's always been their major source of income, and the ability to sort of get them back to normal, right? Not giving anybody anything that they didn't earn their entire lives, right? But really giving them the chance to move into retirement in the way that they anticipated. Yeah.
And if I could just jump on that, I mean, not having to do with PPP, again, we've touched on COVID and the impact on the community a couple of times in this discussion. It's really important, since we were previously talking about retirement, COVID is a situation where obviously a lot of people have lost their jobs, but we know that the group that is least likely to go back to work from prior recessions, this has always been the case, are older workers. And there are a lot of reasons for that. And one of them is ageism. And ageism is as real as sexism and racism. But to Noelle's point, it isn't just small business owners who are seeing, lifelong savings and a life of hard work evaporating before their eyes. Also, workers who had every reason to believe that they could continue working for a few more years, and a few more years would really make a difference to their retirement security, and they're not going to get that chance. It's only a small part of the labor market story, which is a heartbreaking story. Again, as Noelle already pointed out, a lot of us are gonna do fine, but many more of us are not. But it would be important to just remind ourselves, right, that older workers are not going to go back. They're not going to be invited back, and many of them are not going to feel comfortable going back, given the disparate impact that COVID has on olders, and especially, communities of color. So it is something that we worry about a lot. What will the retirement prospects be because of just even that element of this pandemic?
So true, Christina, and especially with the implications that has on the entire family, given that how many Latinos live in multi-generational households and depend on multiple incomes to pay the bills. So it's so true. We have a question for you, Christina, from Arturo Juarez. Can the speakers give their take on the financial, familial, and generational burdens of caring for our parents after they retire, after they're unable to work?
Well, we have a report on just how much is. I don't want to say. So here's the thing. I want to be really sensitive, because I don't know a single person who is caring for a loved one who would say that it's a burden, but they would definitely say that there's a cost to it. And we've done a terrific report of looking at how much unpaid work goes into taking care of a loved one. And there's a real way that we can quantify that, because it is time out of the workforce. And there are other costs associated, especially, we're very familiar with that. I grew up in a multi-generational household. I'm sure that many of our audience is aware of what that looks and feels like, and that there is an economic impact. And so we do have a terrific report on caregiving and the cost to households. And we do look at that cost broken out by race and ethnicity. So I would recommend anyone who's interested in that topic to visit our website and to look for our caregiving page where they can find that data.
Thank you, Christina.
I think a big piece of that comes out is healthcare costs and healthcare. A large number of people don't have healthcare, and so when you're talking about caring for elders and others, it's like, okay, how do you pay that healthcare cost? And COVID, and its disproportionate effects on Latinos, African Americans, in terms of healthcare and healthcare costs, and how that gets factored in also becomes an issue. And so addressing the healthcare side of it is also very important.
Yeah, especially with Latinos having 3 times the infection rate as the rest of the population, as non-Hispanic white counterparts. So that is something that is definitely going to take a toll on our calculation of household wealth moving forward. So something that we will it's too early to tell. We don't have the data to see that, but we can predict that will undoubtedly play a role. So we talked about wage gaps. We have a question from Rosa Hernandez, who says that wage gaps are very real. And you make a point that that Latinx people are carrying the family load. What policies are out there to address this wage gap?
So I think we have to start by thinking about our monetary policy. I think we would be in, frankly, even worse a position had we not seen in our Federal Reserve a real interest and willingness over the past several years, past 5-6 years, and have a lot to thank Chairman Powell and particularly Governor Brainerd for in ensuring that we don't sort of overreact and snap back and raise interest rates and make it even harder on the people who recover more slowly from an economic recession. I think sometimes we don't think about monetary policy being a Latino policy. You better believe it's a Latino policy, right? Because our people are the ones who are having a harder time getting back to work, always did, in an environment where monetary policy was contracting. And then beyond that, it goes back to this question that keeps on coming up about income. If we do not find a way of ensuring a livable wage, right? And you can do that, I think, as Dwight was alluding to, certainly you can do that through a minimum wage hike or something like that, but also taking the cost of healthcare off of people. Healthcare is so crushing. You give people an increase in their pay if you control the costs of their healthcare. And so there are different ways I think that reasonable policymakers could think about this. But if we are not in the end looking at the actual income coming in and those costs that are pulling that income out of the household, we're not being serious. And I think for the Latino community, given the demographics of the economics of our community, we have to get serious about these issues.
It's
and
so
I just
funny.
want to jump in and say, I'm sorry, go ahead, Norena.
No, go ahead, Christina.
I just wanted to jump in and say just 2 quick follow-ups to that. First of all, that this is an important policy question, and that I really encourage CHCI. We could do a panel on just this question, and we could fill an hour. And I hope we do one day. But the point that Noelle just made about monetary policy, and really for the first time that I can remember ever, we are now hearing, governors explicitly bringing up the question that has been, I think, on the minds of many at CHCI and in other places, explicitly asking, what can the Fed do about this problem? That to me, the fact that people who are in that position are willing to ask that question out loud tells me that we're really at an inflection point. And I really hope that we have an opportunity one day to have that conversation for an hour.
I also wanted to add, this goes back to the original question about you talk about monetary policy, and given the outsized role that Latinos are playing in the economy and are impacted by monetary policy and these economic policies, are we really at the table? Are we really at the table when monetary policy is placed? Or is this something that it's just something that's decided by the economists that, we just defer? Are we really represented in the economic sphere making those monetary policy decisions, or at least ensuring that our communities are front and center in setting those monetary policies. So diversity, again, plays a critical role in representation in the conversation of inclusion. What do you guys think about that?
NALCAB has been pushing for some years on the question of diversity in the Federal Reserve for precisely the reason that you articulated well, Norena. And I think that, you know, there is progress being made in the Fed, and I think that's great. But with respect to the Latino community, not enough progress has been made, and particularly in decision-making roles. So certainly governors, and that's in the hands of a president, right? But the presidents of the banks, right, are appointed by their boards. The board members of the banks, it's a relatively complex appointment process, but all the same, we are not seeing proportional representation for Latinos in the Federal Reserve's most important decision-making seats. I know that there's a commitment to it at the Federal Reserve, but commitment can only take us so far. And so for as much as I believe that we've got, you know, again, as Christina said, you know, really important questions being asked publicly and that give us a sense of an inflection point, I think we do owe our friends at the Federal Reserve our ongoing attention on this issue.
Absolutely. So I just want to thank everyone for this amazing discussion. I'm going to move us toward some closing remarks with one question. What do you think is the single most important thing we need to do today to address the existing wealth gap? Dwight, let's start with you.
I think probably the single most important thing is we need to address the second part of the American dream, right? There's homeownership, but then there was traditionally in this country the contract with the worker, right? Whereas if you did an honest day's work and you got an honest day's pay, is that employer provided, and you worked for them, they provided some sort of pension benefits, some sort of, you know, there was a space where employers knew that their workers provided them with the ability to earn income, and they gave some of that back. But somewhere along in the 80s, there was a shift in the contract that between workers and employers where you went to shareholder value. And so companies were thought to, let's maximize our shareholder value, when they forgot about workers. And so I think the contract with the worker has got to be centered in this, because that gets us the wages, that gets us the benefits, that gets us the child care, that gets us to the things that are the underpinnings that create the social safety net, such that when we have crises like this, they are not so deep cutting and so deep cutting on Black and brown people. So I think if there's one thing, we've got to really begin to push public policy that restores that balance between workers and their employers, whether that's unions or other mechanisms. I think that's the starting place.
Thank you, Dwight. And what about you, Christina?
Well, I think from the remarks I've made, it wouldn't surprise anyone to hear that I think that if we want to answer the question, how can we help Latinas and Latina families build more wealth, that we have to center our policy making, but also the questions that we ask about the policies we have that already exist. How do they serve Latinas? How do they serve Hispanic women who are paid the least and, honest to God, are doing the most work? So I don't, it's not, for me, it's not complex. For me, the list when I go to do my work in the morning is that this is an interesting bill. I'm looking at, this policy, and the question I ask myself is, would it have helped my mom when she was raising us? And I think if you can get a good answer to that question, then you're probably on the right path.
Thank you, Christina. And what about you, Noel?
That's a pretty good lens to put on your work every morning, I got to say. You know, at NALCAB, our mission is to strengthen the economy, the entire economy, by advancing economic mobility in the Latino community, right? And so that question of, I go back to what Dwight was saying about that other side of the American dream. The way I think about that is the opportunity that when you work hard, you make it, right? That you do get your shot, to borrow from popular culture. And so economic mobility, obviously there's a great many policies that advance economic mobility, but restoring that promise that this country has made to the people who have come here for hundreds of years, I think really needs to be at the center of our thinking. I mentioned that NALCAB published a Latino economic agenda. I hope folks will go and take a look at nalcab.org and see that it's been endorsed by 100 community-based organizations around the country and Latino communities. And we really think that we can break this down across federal policy and have a Latino perspective on the domestic economic agenda. But you said right now, and so I might have to just default back to get out there and vote and get counted, people.
It's pretty good. Well, we've spoken about homeownership, we've spoken about retirement accounts, about asset building, about having tough conversations with our families, and about bridging the wage gaps. As Latinos, it is time that we understand the role we play and will continue to play in our nation's economy. We're hitting a rough patch, but Latinos are resilient. Latinos are optimistic and entrepreneurial, and we will climb out of this like we've climbed out of it before. But the nation needs to understand that the future of this economy is intricately tied to the future of the Latino community. So it's time we leverage that power. I want to thank our wonderful panelists for this thoughtful discussion: Congressman Cárdenas, Dwight Alexander, Cristina Martin Firvida, and Noel Pollo. Thank you all. Muchísimas gracias. So please keep tweeting about the conference. It's at #CHCIHHM20. So that's Hispanic Heritage Month. We encourage you to attend sessions the rest of today and the week. And if you know people who would be interested in the conference, encourage them to log in and register at chcihhm.live. Also, please join our virtual gala celebration on Monday evening. So get your dresses, get your dancing shoes, because we're still going to have a virtual gala celebration on September 21st from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Once you register for conference, you will be registered for gala. Nothing more to do, just log back in. Thank you so much for joining us today.